Prime Minister Skerrit promises to put an end to opposition violence ahead of Friday's election. The national strike continues in Colombia after ESMAD riot police repressed peaceful demonstrations throughout the night. And in France, unions held nationwide strikes over the government's plan to overhaul the pension system. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is From the South. We begin in Dominica, where the Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit has said the irresponsible violence by some opposition supporters was now damaging the economy and the livelihoods of all Dominicans. He promised to use the full force of the law to end the vandalism and also promised there would be free and fair elections on Friday.
I say to you today, law and order shall be maintained in the Commonwealth of Dominica. There shall be free, fair and peaceful elections in this country on Friday. I have given both the airlines and the cruise sector our assurance of safety and security for the guests while visiting our island. I appeal once again to those misguided youths acting on the direction of persons who should know better to cease and desist from the flagrant violation of the law. Please walk away from your lawless behavior. I have a duty to ensure that law-abiding citizens can go about their business free from fear and without intimidation or unnecessary inconvenience. As Prime Minister of this country, I met with the High Command of the Police Force to make clear that law and order must be maintained and that, as of tonight, perpetrators of lawlessness who endanger the rights and well-being of citizens and visitors must be dealt with, utilizing the full force of the law.
Now, on Wednesday, opposition supporters blocked roads outside the capital in Dominica, and Labour Party supporters tried to clear them. Our correspondent Alejandro Kirk was there.
This is exactly what the opposition had promised in case they did not achieve their goals legally: an internal blockade. And that's how the town of Layou, north of the capital Roseau, looked like at sunrise on Wednesday.
Well, all of this is part of the process, because if the election is against the people, then the people need to stand up and stop the election. So what we're saying is we have a country with about 65,000 people and almost 75,000 voters. This can happen nowhere in the world.
Images like this can be seen in several spots in this island of 80,000, whose elections are due on Friday 5th. Yet, Labour Party members are determined to keep roads clean and safe.
It's a desperate situation with what some people are doing here. They wake up early in the morning to see if they can block the streets so that people from outside think that we are having a lot of trouble here in Dominica.
But not everybody is so welcoming.
Go back to all the fucking country and balance all the country. We done good here.
Dominica allowed observers from the Organization of American States.
Having listened to our officials who were there, that I think the OAS got a different picture from what was being portrayed before, and therefore I think their whole stance and whatever intentions they had in terms of interventions or interfering in the process, I think they have taken a different position right now, and in fact they're here up to observe the elections, and I'm sure they will see exactly what the government has been speaking about, and they will determine what is fact from what is not fact.
Dominica's situation makes you recall events in Bolivia prior to the November coup.
I'm not sure whether the OAS had intended to do something similar in Dominica, but our situation in Dominica certainly doesn't warrant that kind of intervention. Our history and political history will teach us that we have had free and fair elections all the years, henceforth elections in Dominica.
Jesús Romero and Alejandro Kirk, Telesur, Dominica.
Now let's go live to Alejandro Kirk, who is joining us from Dominica. Alejandro, what is the situation there today with less than a day to go before voting starts?
Hello, greetings from, we're standing right in the Ministry of Tourism, the Minister's office, Mr. Robert Tong. The issue today is the problems that the violence sparked by the opposition in the country have created for the country's economy, very dependent on tourism. This is what we want to ask the minister. Minister Tong, what's the damage that so far that the country has suffered?
Well, clearly it's very unfortunate that the opposition has taken a stance to use violence to bring their point across. And it's very sad that it has a very negative impact on the economy of Dominica and also the reputation of our country. We've always been known to be a friendly country, and I'm sure as you walked across the city, you would see that Dominica is filled with friendly people. And their actions have caused some flights to be cancelled. As a result of that, we'd work very hard with Seaborne Airlines or Silver Airlines to come in the afternoon and leave the following day, so we housed the pilots, but clearly the pilots had to walk through all of the rubble and all of the violence that was happening in Marigot. And as a result, they have taken a decision not to come to Dominica until after elections. So clearly many persons who come to our beautiful island for whale watching, for diving, for snorkeling, for hiking, for our hot water baths, which make you feel younger, they're unable to do that right now. You have persons come to Dominica for business, persons come in to meet their friends and their families, and as a result that is impacted. And clearly many persons who may have planned to come to Dominica are going to think twice as a result of that. But I want to say to the people out there that Dominica is still a very friendly country, a friendly people. It's just one or two persons doing this very negative stuff. Even our cruise line business has been impacted. Yesterday there was a cruise line that was scheduled to come to Dominica, and they actually turned away. And our Prime Minister, we've actually advised our Prime Minister, in order to ensure that the reputation of Dominica remains 100% intact. We don't want persons to come to Dominica and have an adverse experience. We've suggested that they don't come until after elections in terms of the cruise, because sometimes if there's a small blockage, it's going to affect the experience of the person on the cruise line. So you had all the vendors who were out there yesterday in the early morning setting up their tents for them to sell their produce, to sell their arts and crafts, to take care of the families, the taxi drivers. All of them actually lost money because they had to spend to do this kind of thing. So it's really having a very negative impact, and all of the work that we've done, especially after Hurricane Maria, is actually putting us in a negative position. So we're really not happy about that, but Dominica remains a free and fair country. Persons have the right to speak, persons have the right to walk around and protest if they have to, but we ask them to do it in a very peaceful manner to achieve their results.
So how dependent is the country's economy on tourism?
Our country is primarily dependent on agriculture, but what we have done is to twin the two together. So when persons come to Dominica, we ensure that they experience a Dominican experience in terms of the food, the drink that we have to offer. So these actions impact not only the tourism sector, but it's also impacting the agricultural sector, because all of these agricultural persons, the fish, the vegetables, the fruits, they provide those to the hotels, and in turn the visitors partake in these and enjoy them. So all of them are impacted as a result of that. So just imagine the farmer who wanted to bring his produce down to town was not able to do that. He would have to bring it back, and I'm just hoping that it didn't spoil and he was able to sell it somewhere. So everyone is impacted, both those directly in the tourism business and also indirectly out of the tourism business. They're all impacted in a negative way.
Well, if 4,000 people are arriving in this small town, it has an impact. But do you have any figures of what is the income-wise, what tourism represents?
Tourism, it should be in the region about $350 million in terms of the economic impact into the country. And what we did with that, we used the Citizen by Investment program to build 5-star hotels to attract a higher level client who will spend more money. And we have the first hotel which is open, which is a Kempinski Hotel in Portsmouth, a very beautiful hotel. And actually they're filled. They're fully booked for December, they're fully booked for January, and what the worry, they have over 150 people employed. The worry is that if people begin to cancel, you can well imagine the impact on them and throughout the entire economy. So we're really concerned about that, and we definitely do not condone acts of violence in terms of trying to bring a point across. And it's just very sad also that the leader of the opposition has actually endorsed those type of actions.
Trust is built over a long time, but mistrust takes a minute. How do you see the prospects in the short, medium term?
I think Dominica has a lot of friends, and the intention is to make sure we reach out to our partners as quickly as possible and on a regular basis. So even from the Ministry of Tourism standpoint, we reach out to our stakeholders, taxi drivers, tour operators, cruise executives, the airline. We reach out to them, sorry. We reach out to them on a daily basis so they know what's going on, so at least it brings confidence back into Dominica.
Okay, thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much.
This is what we have so far in this today in Dominica, and over to you, Quito.
Thank you so much. That was our correspondent Alejandro Cook in Dominica speaking with the country's tourism minister, and he, like Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit has done previously, lamented the economic effects of these violent, or rather large protests across the country that are fiery and that are actually causing a lot of harm to people. And we'll continue to keep you updated with these developments. And now for more on how these elections might play out, we'll go live to Barbados and talk to Peter Wickham of Cadres. He and Cadres have been involved in much of the pre-election polling in Dominica, and he'll be back there for the vote tomorrow. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us. So can you tell us from your experience, how have voter preferences evolved over recent months, and have they changed at all since the opposition started its more violent protests on November 18th?
Yeah, I mean, the last part of the question is very difficult to answer. Certainly our polling would have ended about a month ago, and these violent protests started more recently. The sense that we got when we did our polling was that the government, the governing Labour Party, was doing reasonably well. There were, of course, a sense of, I guess you could say, a voter lethargy that we were seeing. But my sense was that they would still have been able to prevail in the final analysis. When I see these protests and I see this reaction, it tells me as a pollster that the opposition is not convinced that they're doing well, and they believe that they need to step up to this level in order to take action. You know, we have a very simple formula in the Caribbean. If you want to change your government, you get people to go out and vote for it. The fact that they are saying on the one hand that they believe that there will be a change, but on the other hand, they're pushing this violent protest says to me that they're not convinced that there will be a change, which is consistent with my polls, which are saying to me that it's not consistent that there will be a change. As to the impact that this will have, it worries me. There's clearly an economic impact. I think that it destabilizes the country, and I don't know that it helps either side, quite frankly, as we move towards an election. The question then will be, how will people interpret these actions? Will people interpret these as being something which is spread? My sense is that it is not. It is pockets of opposition supporters. Whether people will think that this is the type of opposition that they would want to put in government, or whether they would think that this is a good reason to
We seem to be having some technical difficulties there, so we'll take a short break. Join us in a few. We're back with Peter Wickham from Cadres, who has done the polling in Dominica ahead of the elections. Peter, before this dispute really took off, what were the main issues of concern to voters? How did they rate the performance of the government in terms of reconstruction, education, and other services?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good place to start, because my sense regarding Hurricane Maria is that that was one of the primary issues. And the interesting thing is that as the election approached, the issue shifted from Hurricane Maria to the question of, you know, the economy, the cost of living, things of that nature. Crime was a very low level of concern. So people were just concerned about the broader economic direction. The fact that Hurricane Maria was not high on the priority list basically said to me that government was rated well. And certainly when we asked people how they rated the government's performance in relation to the Maria recovery, you know, it was a B+ or A average on you know, entirely. People felt that the government's performance regarding the recovery from the hurricane was exemplary, and it was something to be cherished. And as I said, I think Dominicans have moved past that, and they're now at the question of saying, okay, where do we go from here as far as development was concerned? That seemed to have been the primary issue on voters' minds at the time.
Peter, is it possible, based on your assessment, to describe the social geography of political allegiances in Dominica? In other words, does the UWP or Labour Party have particular characteristics in terms of the strongholds that they are in charge of?
Almost definitely. I mean, one of the areas of protest is Maho. Maho is near the airport, and that has historically been a UWP stronghold. And then we have, of course, VCAS, which is the stronghold of the governing party. And yeah, we have these political alliances which are very strong. Certainly, the Labour Party would have had more of these, but the Workers' Party has some fairly strong areas. As I said, in Maho is one of them, and that's one of the areas that they have been using that strength to block the streets, to send a signal that there is widespread chaos and confusion. So there's that cleavage, and I think in the Caribbean, we have, for better or worse, these pockets of strength for both political parties, and they really are not evolving or changing. So that constituency has been at UWP for as long as anyone can remember, and then there's some others which have been Labour for as long as anyone can remember. And I don't really get the impression that the hardcore supporters are moving one way or the other. The swing in terms of popular support in the last 5 elections in Dominica has been less than 5%. Which really tells me that there's really no significant shift in terms of political attitudes over the years.
So would you say that the supporters are based on geography, or is it that, you would say the youth are supporting the UWP or the DLP? How would you look at the mix in terms of the supporters? How would you describe them?
No, I would say it's about larger geographical support. The problem, of course, is that geography in Dominica is fluid. So a person who is a Maho resident who moves into the city sees himself as a Maho resident. They will go back to Maho to vote. Indeed, that's one of the problems that they're having now, the whole idea of itinerant voting. So people will have an allegiance to the geography and they will vote on that basis. As far as like the youth are concerned, women, of course, are not, I wouldn't say that that's a politically tribal group in one way or the other. Women are men. But the younger people tend to identify more with Labour, largely because Labour has been able to put on a campaign that appeals to younger people. They had rallies that had music, and we had Buju Banton just recently for Creole Music Festival. So I think that Labour is widely accepted to appeal to that younger group, but certainly the geography is really the key factor.
Now, the government insists elections have always been free and fair in Dominica, and they will be again tomorrow. Are they right?
Yeah, I think they're right. I mean, these issues that the opposition are complaining about are issues that are present in every single Caribbean country, in St. Kitts, in Barbados. And we have changed governments notwithstanding these issues. So we had a bloated voters list in Barbados, considerably greater than the one in Dominica is bloated. And we had a change of government where the opposition won all the seats. The St. Lucia situation is the same thing. The Antigua situation is the same thing. The St. Kitts situation is the same thing. There's no voter ID in Barbados either. That's one of the issues that they're complaining about. So let's be clear. These are not new issues. And while I think that there are important issues for us to discuss, it will not prevent free and fair elections. And, the Commonwealth Secretariat has complained about these issues in virtually every Caribbean country where they have done observer missions. But it hasn't stopped us from having free and fair elections. So my feeling is that if there is a massive swing away from the government, if people in Dominica want to change the government, they can do so under the current circumstances. But I just don't get the sense that that is what Dominicans are really ready to do at this stage.
Now, as you mentioned, ID cards, Yambi Francine Baron gave the OAS a very detailed account of the government's attempts to introduce ID cards, for example, and other minor reforms, and how the UWP blocked these. How do you read this dispute?
Yeah, I mean, UWP tends to be very obstructionist in terms of the way that they do it. So if you say you will have a voter ID, they will say, well, that's not the kind of voter ID we want. If we say we will have one security measure, they will say, well, we want another security measure. I think that those of us who are familiar with the machinations of the UWP understand that that's generally the way that they operate. So it will never be good enough. But at any rate, and I know that there are moves towards the ID card. I'm familiar with those moves. But at any rate, it's impossible for us to do it within the time that is available. Last time they had an election 5 years ago was in December. I think that brings us to the 5-year anniversary. An election is due. So the idea of being able to issue an ID card and to get all of these things done by tomorrow, I think it is highly unrealistic. But yes, I do agree with the electoral officers' comments, and that's part of their strategy. You know, the goalposts keep getting moved, and it's very hard to keep up in relation to all of the changes that are being demanded and the ability to respond to these.
Now, Peter, my final question to you, last and not least, the OAS, are they interfering?
I wouldn't say the OAS as a body is interfering, but I listened to a comment from the American representative on the OAS, and I found it was a bit offensive. There were some inaccuracies in it, and it seemed to project an opinion that was inconsistent with what I knew to be true, and also it appeared as though it was part of a broader OAS mission that not only targets Maduro, certainly, but targets sections of the Caribbean community that are comfortable with him. And certainly Roosevelt Skerrit was one of those people. I thought that was unfortunate, but I think at a broader level, the OAS as a body, I don't believe the OAS has been necessarily interfering. But the Americans within the OAS grouping seem to have a particular perspective that is not necessarily one that's comfortable with government. And I thought that it was unfortunate that the OAS allowed itself to get caught up in that mess.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was Peter Wickham from Cadres. His organization has done the polling in Dominica ahead of the elections tomorrow, and he will be there again to observe and see how the process continues, and we will keep you up to date on these developments. Shifting gears now. The national strike continues in Colombia. Now, protesters are taking to the streets of several cities against the government. Members of the ESMAD riot police repressed peaceful demonstrations throughout the night. Several people are reported hurt and arrested by police. In Soacha, Valle del Cauca, Bucaramanga and Antioquia, police fired tear gas at several children and adults, and there were several arrests. This despite local authorities promising not to request police intervention. In Piera, police fired tear gas and rubber bullets against protesters on Wednesday night. A large crowd chanted "Murderers." Human rights organizations say at least 11 people were arrested in Piera and are now demanding actions from the Ombudsman's office. Millions have mobilized in France, shutting schools, stopping trains and creating immense traffic as unions held nationwide strikes over the government's plan to overhaul the retirement system. 6,000 police officers were deployed to maintain order as anger builds against President Emmanuel Macron for a reform seen as threatening the French way of life. The Eiffel Tower and the Louvre Museum warned of strike disruptions, and Paris hotels struggled to fill rooms. 78% of teachers stayed away from schools in the capital.
First of all, I tried to take the train, but they told me it was canceled. Yeah. And there were no information, no words in the outside. Yeah. I came in and I just see that it was closed.
I'm from New York and I came to Paris on vacation. And so I arrived at the airport this morning not knowing anything about the strikes happening. And we waited for almost 2 hours at the airport. For a train to arrive, and it didn't arrive, but...
Chilean lawmakers are rejecting a so-called anti-looting bill that was passed in the Senate early on Thursday. With 33 votes in favor, the legislation proposes sanctions for those who use protests to promote public disorder. Those who voted against say the law does not use the words anti-looting and could be used to persecute demonstrators. Now, this is what Senator Alejandro Guillier said about the bill.
We were invited to vote on a project against looting, and I want to be very precise. I am against looting, fires, and the destruction of public and private property. But this bill that we have just read, because it has just arrived, says nothing about looting. The only thing I see in this text is an attempt to criminalize legitimate social protests. The Attorney General, Jorge Abbott, has said this morning that social and political conflict cannot be penalized. This is why I'm voting against it.
Moving to Bolivia, opposition Senator Janine Áñez has fired her recently appointed cabinet chief, Jageres Justiniano. The outgoing minister said he was dismissed because of his close relationship with Luis Camacho, the main leader of the coup and Áñez's rival for president. According to Justiniano, the self-proclaimed leader should not vie for president after she selected the members of the electoral court who are responsible for deciding on elections. This recent development shows how the de facto administration is in crisis, united only to depose President Evo Morales.
Now she wants to be a candidate in the election, and that's why she decided to take control of the ministry. In the beginning, she didn't care for my proximity to Camacho, but that has changed, since he said he'll run for president.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsat Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you so much for watching.